Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to this video lesson. We're going to be talking about the repetition structure. So let me go ahead and begin a new project. And I have to go over here to other languages to access CSharp. And this will be a Windows Forms application. I'm going to type in CSharp and we'll say repetition 1. Specifically, let's just go ahead and display numbers based on the user input. So what I'll do is I'll open up the toolbox and also the Solution Explorer because I'm going to need those. I need to drag and drop some items and also the Properties panel. And I'll click on Button, place it over here. Click on Label, place it over here. Click on Text Box and click it over here. I want to change the font size for these items to 12 points. So I'm going to select the label and I'll go over here to Font Size. Type in 12 over here. Same thing with the button. I'll double click over here where it says size, type in 12. And then for the text box, we'll do the same thing. Type in 12 points. Let me go ahead and move the label to the upper left-hand corner like this. And in the text property, I'm going to say enter an integer. Let me go ahead and open up this form and I'm going to move the text box into position like this. And then I'll take the button, make it a little bit bigger, something like that looks good. And we'll just simply say display numbers. So over here, display numbers. Looks good. Let's go ahead and place a label down here. I'll just take this guy over here, copy and paste, which means Control-C, Control-V as in Victor. And I want to be able to resize this thing. So that means the auto size property has to be false. The border style, we'll set that to fixed single. Let me go ahead and make the size adjustments now. Something like that looks pretty good. Now I don't want that text to be in the upper left-hand corner in terms of its alignment. So we're going to change the text align property to middle center. Looks good. Let's get rid of that text. So I'll double click over here and hit backspace on my keyboard to get rid of it. And let me resize this. I want to get rid of the minimize and the maximize buttons. So that's going to be maximize box. We'll set that to false. Minimize box. We'll set that to false as well. We got rid of those. Let's go ahead and change that from form 1 to display numbers. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and give names to the various items. So what I'll do is I'll go over here to the name property. Now that's a text box, so automatically I'm going to put in txt. And since the user is going to be entering an integer, we'll just simply say that that's going to be txt user num. Over here, I have the button. And so we'll just simply say that that's going to be btn display numbers. So I'll go over here, btn display numbers. And then finally, we have the label on the bottom here, and we'll just simply call that LBL result. So this guy over here, LBL result. Looks good. Let me just make sure. Let's see, txt user num, btn display numbers, LBL result. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and double click on the button so that I can go into the code area. And I'm going to remove the two panels. All right, now let me reduce the size of the font here. It doesn't have to be so big. All right, in this area, I'm going to go ahead and type in the comments that I typically type from my program, which is declarations, get user input, calculation or shuns, and then finally output. Now in the declaration section, ask yourself, what is it that I need from the user? What is it that I need to give back to the user? Certainly I need a number over here from the user. I'm going to be displaying a series of numbers, specifically from 0 all the way up to and including the user number. Okay, if that's the case, then I'm definitely going to have to create a variable called user num. I'm going to create a string called output. I'll initially give that nothing. As you can see here, I'm assigning it to nothing. Eventually, it's going to display something like this, like 0, 1, 2, 3, so forth and so on. If the user enters the number 5, then this will be displaying numbers from 0 to 5. All right, now let me talk to you about the repetition structure. The repetition structure means you are repeating something over and over and over again. If you are repeating something over and over again, you're going to need a counter. And the counter is kind of like, let's run a certain number of laps around the track. If it's a mile, we're going to run 4 laps. If it's 2 miles, we're going to run 8 laps. You need some sort of a counter to keep track how many times have you lapped around this track. Well, instead of a track, we have a counter that keeps track of how many times we've performed this repetition structure. So I'll explain how that works out in just a moment. We'll take the user number. We're going to place into it convert dot to int 32. Whatever is inside of that text box. So I type in txt, double click or hit tab, dot te, and already text appears. Looks good. Let me go out here and put a semicolon. I now have the number from the text box. It's placed into user num. Okay, so in the calculation section, let me go ahead and get ready to start a race. So that means that I have to have the counter set at 0. Are you ready to race? We're going to keep on racing while the counter is less than or equal to the user num. And then I'm going to put open and close curly braces. So this is the beginning of our race. First, we establish what the counter is. As long as that counter value is less than or equal to user num, we're going to keep on looping over and over and over again. That's what the while repetition structure does. It just keeps on repeating over and over and over again. When this is no longer true, this Boolean expression, then we jump out of the while statement. All right, well, while this thing is true, what is it that you want me to do? Well, take the output statement and let's update it. It's going to be updated with the old output statement, whatever that happens to be. We're going to concatenate that with, and we'll say convert to string, whatever the value of counter is. And don't forget to add a space. So we're going to concatenate a space after this. So for example, if output happens to be blank, now it's going to be whatever the output is, which is going to be blank. We're going to send the counter out to the, or we're going to concatenate, I should say, the counter to output. And counter is initially 0, so that'll be a 0. And then we're going to put a space. All right. After that, don't forget to increment the counter by 1. And so what this does is it's basically the same thing as counter is being assigned counter plus 1. In other words, increment the counter by 1. So if it was 0, it's now 1. Now it's 2. Now it's 3. Now it's 4. So this is an updating statement. It's the same thing as this guy over here. Whatever the old value of counter is, increase it by 1. And now the new value of counter is 1 more than it was before. Okay, if that's the case, then if counter was 0, is 0 less than, let's say the number is 5. Is 0 less than 5? Yes. So here's my output statement. I output 0, and then I put a space. As you can see over here, there's a space right here. Counter is now incremented by 1. So it was 0, now it's 1. Is 1 less than or equal to 5? Yes. Okay, take the old output, which is this right here. Concatenate that with whatever the current value of counter is. Well, that's going to be 1, as I just stated. Concatenate that with the space bar. Increment the counter. It was 1, now it's 2. Is 2 less than or equal to 5? Yes. Take the old output, here it is. Concatenate that with the value of counter. Well, I just said it's 2. Concatenate that with a space. There it is, space. Now increment the counter by 1. And we keep on doing this over and over and over and over again. So what happens is this output value will be appended. It'll be updated every single time we approach this. When we're done with this, we can display the results on the label. And we'll simply send out the output to this text property of this label. Okay, let's run the program and see what it looks like. Let me go ahead and enter a number. We'll say 5 and display numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with spaces in between. How about 3? Okay, 0, 1, 2, 3. How about 10? All right, 0 through 10. How about 15? Okay, 0 through 15, and it just goes to the next line. So you can see how this program works. Let's stop the program so we can investigate it. So what I'm going to do is to stop the program right here. Let me run the program. All right, and I'll enter the number 3. So we are stopping time right here. As you can see, the number 3 has been entered by the user. That's why we see over here, user num. All right, and by the way, you remember in a previous lecture how I got this autos and locals panel. I just simply go to debug, Windows, and then here is autos, and here's locals. And basically it shows you, with time frozen, it shows you what these values are. So this panel doesn't have to be so big. We'll reduce the size here. So at this point, the user number, let me see if I can double tap here. Can I make that a little bit bigger? Maybe I just have to drag and drop. There we go. That is currently 3 at this point. Well, counter, as you can see, is 0. I just hovered on top of it to get the value. Move my mouse pointer, hover on top of this. That's 3. Is 0 less than or equal to 3? Yes. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Now, I had to reduce the size of my form, so I can't see my tools here. But if I click on this guy, you'll see these. It won't be so compressed like this probably on your screen. You'll probably see this guy over here where it says step over. So we'll step over. We're now inside of the loop. I'll step over again. We are about to take the old value of output, which as you can see is nothing. We are about to concatenate the conversion of a string of the value of counter. Well, what is counter? Counter in this case is 0. And then we're going to add a space. So do you see what output is? Let's see what happens after I click step over. Now you can see that output is 0 and a space. Counter currently is 0. We're about to increment it by 1. So now notice that counter has incremented by 1. We are now at the bottom of our loop. Shall we do another lap? Well, it depends. As long as the counter is less than or equal to user number. Is the counter less than or equal to the user number? Yes. 1 is less than or equal to 3. So when I step over, it goes into the while loop. And then I'm going to now execute this statement over here. It says take the old output, which is this, concatenate it with the current value of counter, which as you can see is 1, and a space. Okay, so over here, notice what happens. Output was 0 space, now it's 0 space, 1 space. The counter is about to be incremented by 1, so now it's 1 over here, and then when I step over, now notice it's 2. We have reached the bottom of the while loop. Shall we do this again? It depends. As long as counter is less than or equal to user number, yes. Is counter less than or equal to user number? Yes. So we go into here, we do this again. Notice over here what happens to the output. Now we concatenate a 2 and a space. Counter is going to be incremented by 1, so that goes to 3. We go back to the top over here. Is 3 less than or equal to 3? Right? Is 3 less than or equal to 3? Yes, it is. So I go into the while loop. Output is about to be appended. And so now it's 3 space has been appended. Counter, which is currently 3, is now going to be 4. And then I go back over here. Is 4 less than or equal to 3? Is 4, counter, less than or equal to 3? No. So watch what happens over here. When I step over, it jumps out of the while statement. We are about to take the output string, which is all of this, and send it to the text property of the label. So now at this point, I'll just go ahead and click continue, and you can see what happens. This is what the output string looks like. We've sent it to the output. So this is a general introduction to the while statement. A repetition structure. That's what we call this. We call this a repetition structure. And what this does is it repeats something over and over and over again while this condition is true. If it's not true, then it'll jump out as you saw and continue with the next part of the program. All right, let me show you a catastrophe. I'm going to put my mouse pointer over here, comment this line out. Notice that the counter is not being updated. So counter will always be 0. So is 0 less than user number? Goes back over here. Is 0 less than user number? And so what ends up happening is this ends up executing over and over and over again. So if I put just the number 3 over here, hit display numbers, notice that nothing is being displayed here, but the program really is running. Let me prove that to you. Let me stop this over here. Let's take a look at what the output is. Wow, look at this. The output currently is all of these zeros right here. In fact, if I take a look at this, look at that. It's all of these zeros right here. Why did it do that? Well, let me stop the program. Stop. As long as the program, or as long as the while statement is not updating, keep on looping. Counter is 0. It's less than or equal to user number, output. Counter is less than or equal to user number, output. And just keep on doing this over so it doesn't stop. We call this an infinite loop. So really you have to remember that there are 3 parts to the while statement. So before we race, we have to initialize our counter. What is the criteria for us to continue to loop? In this case, we will continue looping as long as the counter is less than or equal to user num. And then the third part of a repetition structure is how are you going to increment the counter from one iteration to the other iteration. Iteration is a fancy name for lap, right? As you keep on lapping around the loop structure, how are you going to increment the counter? Is it by 1? Is it by 2? Is it by something different? Is it decreasing by 1? Decreasing by 2? That's the decision. So 3 parts right here. This, what's the starting value of the counter? What is the criteria for the looping structure? And how are we incrementing or decrementing the value of the counter? And then the rest is history. So this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.